When Svalstrom did not return on the third day, they began to worry. Chimarian tried to reassure Chaneda and Casales. Uwe is an experienced spaceman. Plus, he has the most experience with aliens of any of us, he said, trying his best to portray a confidence he didn't really feel. His skimmer should have enough food, filters, and everything else in it for at least another week. I think we can trust his instincts and give him a couple more days. He knows what he's doing. Chaneda shook her head, causing some of her lush hair to fall from under the netting. The unruly strands only added to her anxious expression. "That's the problem," she exclaimed. "Uwe is too good a professional to miss several sessions in a row. We can write off 1 or 2 as an accident, but he's been out of contact for more than 24 hours straight. No, something's wrong. We've got to go check it out." "Damn planet," Casales said sullenly. "I wish we'd never find it. It's all wrong. This morning I wanted to take tissue samples from trees in the grove north of the settlement. You think I got anything? Like hell I did." "Wait. What are you saying?" Chimerian turned toward the biologist with interest. "The blabbermouths didn't let you in?" They called the planet's local population blabbermouths for their habit of incessantly muttering to themselves. Moreover, each local inhabitant always carried several devices from which continuous streams of words constantly poured out. At least, Svalstrom believed that it was speech formed into words, although all the linguistic equipment refused to recognize this noise as a means of communication between intelligent beings. Casales shook his head. "No. Why would they? You know they don't pay any attention to us at all. It's like we don't even exist." That was true. The locals certainly didn't bump into the Terran ship or the humans themselves, which meant they could see all, but they completely ignored such a seemingly extraordinary event as the arrival of an alien space expedition from distant stars. If humans somehow tried to attract their attention, the blabbermouths would just carefully avoid them, not even bothering to give them a glance. And they were constantly muttering. Anyway, I came to the grove and strictly followed protocol. Leaves, outer layer of bark, fruits, something like spruce cones, drilled through several trunks to take wood samples from the heartwood. No one was in the grove, though I was undaunted by the feeling that someone out there kept bubbling in my back. Sometimes, I feel like even the rocks on this planet are talking, each in their own language. Casales rubbed his left ear, as if shaking out the local abracadabra accumulated there over the past few days. "And when I returned to the ship and opened the sample case, what did you think? Empty as if nothing had ever been there." "Maybe you just forgot it in the grove?" Chaneda asked. "Well, you were a little nervous and didn't put everything you'd collected away." "Maybe." Casales nodded meekly. "Anything can happen. That's the 6th time in a row I've gotten nervous and didn't put the samples away. Oh, I'm so nervous, poor me." He banged his fist on the table. "I still don't have a clue about local biology because I can't get a single sample to the lab." He yelled indignantly. "Everything miraculously evaporates on the way to the ship. If I was really that absent-minded, I wouldn't even be able to find my way to the latrine by now." "Relax, take it easy," Chimerian said. In the absence of Svalstrom, he was acting as head of the expedition. "We are now all in the same position. None of us really understands what is happening on this planet. But now we have a more pressing task than the mysteries of local nature and civilization. We must decide what to do about Uwe's disappearance. I've given it some thought, and I think we should go after him. No communication for 24 hours is too alarming a sign." Chaneda nodded. "I'll take the second skimmer and leave immediately." She stood up. Casales, who had calmed down a little, sighed heavily and followed. "I'll go with you," he said. "I am the expedition doctor after all. I hope that my skills will not be needed, but—" He didn't finish. They all hoped so, but now they didn't know what to think. When the Bubble Mouths' village, near where the Terran Research Ship Magellan had landed, began to fade away at the rear view screen, Chanita turned on the autopilot and turned to Casales. "You know, I agree with you," she said. "It's a very strange place. This is my 7th expedition, and I've seen a dozen alien civilizations, but none of them was as strange as this one." Casales nodded thoughtfully. "I did a little part-time work while I was at the university," he said, "as an orderly in a mental facility. I feel like we're on a planet that's all schizophasic." Before we left, Uwa said he had an idea he wanted to test. Chaneta tapped her finger on the navigator screen, showing the course. He specifically went to the town where the largest temple is located. "We've been watching these temples, as you call them, in several towns, and we haven't noticed any signs of anything religious going on there, except that some kind of crazy polyphony is constantly pouring out of them, like an election debate in a hellish madhouse. No ceremonies, no rituals, and the locals visit them without any system." "I agree. The original theory of a religious purpose doesn't seem to hold up," Chanita said. "Until we can decipher the natives' language, we can't guarantee that it's not true. But we have to call those buildings something, especially since they seem to have the same purpose. All we have left to do is to figure out what this purpose is," Casales said. Chaneta sighed. "It's all about language. Uwe is sure that language is the solution to the riddle of local civilization, to the fact that they ignore our arrival, and to the incredible complexity of the whole system, which is beyond the grasp of our linguistic analyzers." "Maybe there is no language. Maybe they're not intelligent in our sense of the term," Casales suddenly suggested. "Like ants. And this alleged language is just a physiological side effect, like the buzzing of wings." "Tell me something new," Chaneta parried. "We've already discussed this possibility with Uwa. I can give you a counter-assumption that is just as good, maybe even more surprising. What if everyone on the planet speaks their own language? And all those talking boxes they carry around are translators that continuously broadcast what they're saying to the people around them?" Casales' jaw dropped. "Are you serious?" he finally asked. "But it's just impossible to believe." "Well, how is it worse than a planet with schizophasia?" Chaneta shrugged. "I had hoped that Uwe would have gotten something out of his trip, but right now I'm much less concerned with the local linguistic mysteries than whether something happened to him." They went silent, staring at the landscape beneath the skimmer, which suddenly seemed vaguely threatening. Waiting for news from Chaneta and Casales, Cimmerian, not to waste time, decided once again to review the accumulated materials, which, it must be admitted, were unusually few for several days already spent by the Terrans on the planet. The unusual local civilization fascinated them so much that they plunged headlong into attempts to decipher the local language and establish contact with the Aborigines, who ignored the humans. Casales was worried about the impossibility of properly researching the physiology and biochemistry of the Aborigines, but they did not make contact. The only way remained to take a closer look at one of the locals was to abduct one of them, but that was ridiculous. It was clear that life on this planet was based on proteins similar to those on Earth, but not much else. Cimmerian was confused by the biologist's oddly unsuccessful attempts to take samples. What's behind them? At first, he had even suspected Casales of something he couldn't even define. Laziness? Nervous breakdown? Not sabotage, really. But now that Svalstrom was missing, Cimmerian didn't know what to think. He turned on the view screens. A few images of the same dull settlement appeared, filmed from several angles. Still the same incomprehensible bustle of the natives, constantly walking through the streets. Still, the same silent background noise formed of thousands of voices that mumbled non-stop gibberish. So far, Terrans had not even been able to determine whether the talking boxes with which the natives were equipped were transmitters of some kind, or simply generated. What did they generate? There was no answer. Cimmerian was still inclined to the second option since they had not yet detected any activity in the radio range, but this option, too, left many questions. The sixth sense of an experienced researcher told him that despite the outwardly absurd situation, there must be some elusive logic behind it. But it was impossible to find this logic, and it made him feel despair. Bubble mouths were snooping in the streets, working in the fields, and living their lives. The town talked. Cimmerian suddenly, even for himself, turned on the external speaker system and shouted into the microphone with all his might. "Hey, you! Will you shut up at least for a second?" The powerful system, designed to be heard several kilometers away, blew his ridiculous outburst far away. He was immediately pricked by a pang of conscience. Unprofessional and stupid. Scientists don't do that. And then he saw that all the town's inhabitants suddenly looked at him without stopping muttering. For the first 10 minutes, Chaneda and Casales looked around, confused, and only then did it suddenly dawn on them what they were seeing. The large temple, or whatever the building was that Uwe Svalstrom wanted to investigate, was no longer there. Instead, a strange, semi-abstract sculpture that resembled a human head rose several dozen meters into the sky. Or the head of a native. They were humanoid enough to be almost indistinguishable from Terrans in such an artistic representation. Around it, instead of a city, was an empty space paved with neat square slabs of stone. Had it not been for the coordinates in the navigator, the Terrans would have thought they had come to some other place. But this was the very point where Svalstrom planned to try to unravel the mystery of this alien Babylon. "I don't understand," Chaneda said at a loss. "Where has everything gone? And where is Uwe?" Casales walked leisurely around the sculpture. "So quiet," he said. "What?" He patted the surface of the sculpture with his hand. "Don't you notice? For the first time on this planet, I don't hear that damn muttering. It's perfectly quiet here." Chaneda nodded in surprise, and then her gaze fell on what might have been called the statue's face if it weren't for the strange distortions. She recoiled and covered her mouth with the palm of her hand. "No!" Casales was at her side in 2 jumps. "What's wrong?" Chaneda pointed at the statue with a trembling hand. That's Uwe, and there's his skimmer at the base. Look." Casales stared at the sculpture. Through the strange psychedelic curves, like frozen stone waves and swirls, the facial features of the expedition leader and ship captain, Uwe Svalstrom, were clearly visible. In addition, in one of the protrusions at the base of the sculpture, which Casales first took for a deformed pedestal, one could easily guess the contours of the skimmer, only slightly smoldered, like a wax candle. "What happened here?" Casales said. "When did they have time to build it?" "It's been only 3 days since—" "Where's the town? Where's Uwe?" Chaneda shook her head, but before she could answer, the sculpture spoke. Rainbow patterns twisted, merging into unexpected, hitherto unseen versions of reality, Amazing combinations of the cold landscapes of deep space, green apple orchards, the sense of an old wooden house, the hot tropical wind touched to the face, and a million other sensations transformed into the perfect form to be broadcast to whoever was ready to receive them. In these labyrinths of realities and perceptions flickered a multitude of entities, continuously interacting with each other and enriching themselves through this interaction. The fractal complexity of these entities grew with each such interpenetration, linking the overall meta-universe more and more closely together and creating additional levels of complexity and communication within it. Somewhere along the fringes of this universe, the clarity of the patterns was being lost, blurring. The universe began to thin out and become ghostly, and then many fractal entities would rush in, growing through the weakened areas, strengthening them with their presence, and correcting the few new entities that lacked the coherence necessary to function in a harmonious space. Syntax, Chaneda said, adjusting the small translator on her chest. The small box was a steady stream of words in several Earth languages: Russian, English, Chinese, Yoruba, Telugu, and Quechua. It took them almost 24 hours to program the syntax generators. Unfortunately, it was too late for Uva and Cimmerian. This entire planet, with its inhabitants, nature, and everything else, is not really a real object, but a complex, intelligent syntactic construct, only partially woven into our reality. That's why they didn't notice us. We are just syntactic noise to them. No one communicates with something like radio noise, and certainly doesn't consider it intelligent. I still can't believe it, Casales said, stunned. It all sounds like a hallucination to me, a surreal delusion. If only this delusion hadn't incorporated Svalstrom and Cimmerian, Chaneda said sadly. Casales remembered the strange sculpture into which Uva had turned and the 40 ghostly images of Cimmerian frozen motionless around the ship in various poses, running, lying on his back, standing with his hands raised to his face, screaming, kneeling. All these images were indistinguishable from the real Cimmerian, but they were incorporeal and were not recorded by any instruments, just visual images devoid of any other physical substance. Uwe was able to warn us after all, Casales said. Yes, Chaneda nodded. Apparently, he started guessing something even earlier, and when syntax began to embed him, he managed to retain some part of his personality. I don't know how he did it. Or maybe syntax just got interested in exploring such a new possibility of existence. But shouldn't we be safe now? Casales asked uncertainly. We're already several light years away. It's far enough away that no words can reach us. Are you sure we need this? He tapped his syntactic defense generator. Chaneda shook her head. I don't know. We can't be sure of anything. It's an area totally different from the physical laws we're used to. For one thing, if you separate a small part from the overall syntactic construct, it loses reality in our universe. Think of your misadventures with vanishing samples. On the other hand, we don't understand whether the categories of space and time even exist for syntax. And most importantly, what happened to us when the part of syntax that Uwe became temporarily made us part of himself to give us insight into what happened? To what extent did we go from being ordinary people to being alien syntactic constructs? I'm not even sure that this, she patted the defense generator, helps. We just don't have the criteria to evaluate because we see the situation from the inside. Casales stood up resolutely. There's no need to plunge into such depths of self-examination, he said. I think the scientists back home will figure it out. You're right. Chanita said. There's no need to panic too soon. 2 more months, and everything will be fine. Cimmerian allowed himself to relax only after the ship entered the first series of hyperjumps on the way home. Bitterness and grief for his diseased comrades came over him all at once. If only he could have foreseen. By some miracle, he had managed to decipher the posthumous message from Uva, which was transmitted by the captain through the planet's natives. Who would have thought there could be such a thing as a syntactic weapon? It was hard to realize to what extent intelligent beings sometimes come in their attempts to invent new methods of mass destruction. The ones on the planet are now trapped between aggressive syntactic memes and the need to continuously generate defenses against them. It's simply amazing that they still have the rudimentary ability to maintain the remnants of intelligent behavior so as not to go extinct. If it weren't for these temples, the powerful generators of syntactic defenses, the poor things would have died long ago, just as Uwa, Chaneta, and Casales had died. Cimmerian couldn't stop reproaching himself for letting Chaneta and Casales go in search of Svalstrom. If only they had stayed on the ship. He remembered their dry, motionless statues, crumbling into fine dust at the first touch. There was something in the message from Uwa about the detailed principles of syntax weapons, but that was far beyond Cimmerian's comprehension. But that was okay. He was quite sure the scientists back home would figure it all out. Svalstrom glided through the outer streams of syntax, trying to stay out of the inner core, where swirls of the most active fractal entities glittered. The first few contacts with them were enough for him to realize that further close interactions could cost him the irreparable loss of his individuality. That was why he had to gain strength first and work on expanding the boundaries of the syntax to absorb as many new fractal branches as possible. Then he would be able to confront the old core and accomplish what had never happened before, as far as the concepts of time were applicable here. To try to divide the syntax, break away from the old core, and form his own independent space. It is a pity, of course, that this happened to Chaneta, Casales, and Cimmerian, but he was still relatively inexperienced then, and could not incorporate them without destroying their syntactic foundations. On the other hand, it was their absorption that gave him an initial momentum that allowed him to successfully evade persistent attempts to incorporate him into common syntactic fractal clusters. Svalstrom expected that once he managed to get his main offshoot to Earth and fumble with his fellow scientists, they would figure things out quickly together. Of this, he was quite sure. Syntax didn't know this feeling, as it was a new concept for him, but the human in his position would say he was very interested. The new elements were awesome and promised a qualitative expansion of the fractal fields in many new directions. Just a few more transmutations, and he would figure it all out. Of this, he was pretty sure.